So this summer, we've been taking a road trip, and we've been trying to navigate our way through the very strange, very different, and I think in some ways kind of hostile world that we live in. And each week, I've tried to identify one dimension of this strange world of the 21st century and think about how we as Christians can navigate through that. So the first week, we looked in on God's people in Babylonian captivity and their cry in the Psalms, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And we talked about the foreign land that God's people have really often lived in. Captivity constantly, it seemed like, especially in the Old Testament, but even in Jesus' day, Roman, if not captivity, Roman command over where they lived and who ruled them. And what we tried to understand is that we are on a road trip. We're not expected to be in sync with this world. This is a foreign land. It's not ruled in the way God would necessarily rule it. And so to make our way through that, we have to understand we are pilgrims, we're exiles. We're on a road trip, not for here, but for Zion. And if you remember, we closed with, we're marching to Zion. That's the destination of our road trip. Then last week, we talked about how decayed and sinful this world is. From the great hymn, Abide With Me, change and decay in all around I see, the author wrote. And so how do we live in a world of decay, in a world of sin? And we talked about the Christian's role as salt and light in a decaying and dark world. And so today we're going to look at, let me turn this on, the complexity, if you will, of this world of the 21st century. Very complex. And to see what we can do as Christians to live in this kind of complexity. And I want to begin today, this is kind of great timing. We just prayed for students going to college and other kinds of schooling. I wanted to begin with my own trip as a 17-year-old from Kansas to the Bay Area in 1968 and Stanford University. And let me tell you, that was a very unusual trip. To go from a very conservative family and a very conservative church in Kansas to the Bay Area in the 1960s and Stanford University, nothing had prepared me for that trip. If we had drugs in Kansas, I didn't know about them. And suddenly they were everywhere, all around my dorm and the campus. As I walked across campus, I saw people burning draft cards and dropping them into Army helmets. And I thought, isn't that illegal? And then I thought, but that's probably the point. For my freshman seminar, I had to go to a Chinese bookstore in San Francisco and buy unauthorized books from under the counter, communist literature from under the counter, in order to prepare and take to my class. By the way, I'm a button collector, so I picked up a couple Mao buttons while I was in the store. And this was before I even got to class, where we were studying existentialism and Marxism and imperialism and other isms I had never even heard of. And so as the Grateful Dead sang in those days, what a long, strange trip it's been. But I want to focus for a moment on one specific aspect. When I signed up for religion classes from a very top scholar on the Stanford faculty. And of course, my idea of a religion class had been my Sunday school at the Church of Christ in Kansas, but this was nothing like that. This was not Acts 2:38. This was not even John 3:16. This was reading heavy-duty theologians like Paul Tillich's 3-volume Systematic Theology, or Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who argued that we live in the noosphere on our way to the omega point. This had not been in my Sunday school training. Or sampling Karl Barth's 31-volume of Church Dogmatics. I got extra credit for working through one of those 31 volumes. When I was home for a break from college, I told our Kansas preacher what I had been reading in theology, and he said, yeah, those are confusing, but at a very high level. And somehow when you went to class, Confused, the professor's lecture made it even more confusing as he lectured his way through all this difficult material. However, if you looked on the blackboard before class started, he would write in 2 or 3 words or phrases in the upper right-hand corner of the blackboard. And he would generally not even refer to them. But if you thought about those words and phrases up there while he lectured, those little clues or ideas or principles started to bring some order to the chaos of all of this reading and all of these thoughts. And I realized, okay, that's what this is all about. We're going to tackle all this complex theological material, but in the end, the point is to find some simplicity, some order that we can bring to it, some way to grasp all of this complexity. That's the intellectual journey that we're on here at Stanford. It's not easy, but at least I've started to see what we were supposed to be doing. We were supposed to wade into the complexity, but we were supposed to find some simplicity that would help us to bring order and understanding. So this process, which I now follow throughout my life, even in preparing these sermons for you, was perfectly described by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes when he said, "I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity." I love that quotation. I would not give a fig for the simplicity on this side, the shallow side, if you will, of complexity. But having waded through the complexity, I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. Now, this isn't easy because we do live in a very complex world, and that's what I'm wanting to talk about today. Everything we do seems complicated. You can't order a coffee without choosing among 4 or 5 different cup sizes, many with foreign names like venti, and they have several flavorings, and you can get it hot or you can get it cold. You have, if you want dairy, you maybe have a dozen different dairy choices. You can freeze up in the grocery store reading the labels of the 40 boxes of cereal to decide which one is really healthy for you. Heaven forbid if you're online and you forgot your password, because you will need a new one, and you will need large and small caps, and you will need numbers, and you will need symbols. Certain symbols work, certain other symbols work, and heaven help you, because you'll never remember all of this that you have to put together to even sign in. Your cell phone has countless banners and messages and alerts and warnings and sounds, all to tell you about some election in Liechtenstein that you didn't even know about. So what we're losing track of, I think, in navigating this complex world is the beauty and the power of simplicity. I love this quote from the great artist and inventor Leonardo da Vinci: "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." Or a music composer said when he writes, "I try to clear a path from the mess of complexity to the order of simplicity." And of course, the well-known Apple inventor and creator Steve Jobs said, "You have to work to make it hard to make it simple, but once you get there, you can move mountains." I think that's a wonderful quotation about the power of simplicity. So let's apply this now more directly to the spiritual world that we live in. Although the law started out very simply, what does the 10 Commandments take? Three paragraphs, 4 paragraphs. But the Pharisees managed to make, as you may know, 613 laws from those 10 Commandments. And then on top of that, they had thousands of interpretations and traditions and fences that they built around the laws. All of these things the people had to observe. Jesus said they loaded people down, the Pharisees did, with burdens, Luke chapter 11, verse 46, and they cleaned the outside of the cup while the inside of the cup was still dirty, Matthew 23 and verse 25. And so Jesus comes along and he cuts through all of this complexity, and he says, really, all the law and the prophets stand on these 2 commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22, 37 to 40. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said everything comes back to that. Jesus broke the Gordian knot. Do you know that story? In the ancient world, a hopelessly complex and difficult knot was tying a chariot to a pole. And the legend was that whoever could undo that knot would become the ruler of all of Asia. And so many leaders and scholars and smart people came and they tried, but none were able to undo the Gordian knot. It was in the town of Gordia. Finally, Alexander the Great came to town, lifted up his sword, and chopped the knot in half. Boom, he undid the Gordian knot. Well, I think that's what Jesus did here. He took the Gordian knot that the Pharisees had tied up all the law into, and he chopped it and undid the Gordian knot, cutting it, knowing that the Pharisees had made too much complexity out of the law, and he focused his followers on the simplicity of God's will for them. Love the Lord your God, all your heart, your whole soul, your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. But we have to acknowledge Jesus' teaching had its own complexities. Note, for example, in Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, but Jesus' complexity is different. That's what I want us to see here. Jesus is not making a bunch of new rules and commands. He's not taking the Pharisees' 613 and blowing it up to 1,200. Instead, he's taking the law, or our focus on the law, deeper and closer to the heart of the matter. So he says, you have heard, don't murder. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 21. But I tell you, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Oh, that's difficult. But that's going more to the heart of the matter, which is what Jesus is really about. Likewise, he takes the command about adultery, and he says, but anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Oh boy, that's another tough one. But again, he's going deeper and closer to the heart of the matter. So the complexity of Jesus' teaching is all about the heart. It's about the motives. It's not just the actions. It's coming closer to the heart. For out of the heart, Jesus says in Matthew 15:19, come the evil thoughts. So Jesus initially offers us simplicity. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. He cuts through the Pharisees' Gordian knot of rules and interpretations and complications. But then he asks us to go deeper, to always try to go to the heart. Now, what I'd like to propose to you is, if that's true with Jesus in the spiritual world, that also helps us get through the complexity of the world of the 21st century. I want to propose to you this morning that the key to living more simply in a complex world, which we would all love to do. Sally asked me a while back, she said, what is it you really miss about the good old days? And I said, because life was just much simpler then. So if we want to live with greater simplicity in this very complex world, the way to do it, I think following the way of Jesus, is by focusing on the heart. Focusing on the heart. The world wants to pull us in 1,000 directions every minute of the day. I like to say so much of the world is, quote, unnecessarily complex. It doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it. But I think the philosopher, there it is. I think the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard had it right when he wrote, purity of heart is to will one thing. Isn't that a great statement? Purity of heart, to get your heart pure, as Jesus would want, is to will one thing. This very important insight, I think, came from James chapter 4 and verse 8. Purify your hearts, you double-minded, James writes. If your heart is conflicted, if it's double-minded, it's not going to be strong, and it's not going to help you through this life. Purify your heart, James says, for those of you who are double-minded. And Jesus, of course, himself said in the Sermon on the Mount, right at the beginning, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Matthew 5 and verse 8. So I think the key to make it through the clutter and the noise and the distractions and the complexities in the world of the 21st century is the heart. Keeping the heart single-minded, focused, and therefore pure. Okay, how do we do that? Well, here I cheated in preparing my sermon, or maybe I just modernized. I asked Google AI, which is my new friend, by the way, what are 3 rules for good heart health? There's 3 rules for everything, so I knew they would have an answer. And of course, in seconds, they gave me 3 rules for good heart health: diet, exercise, and rest. And if you think about it, that's not a bad prescription for our spiritual hearts as well. Diet. We can't just consume the junk food that the world gives us. All the screens of our life are filled with junk food of various kinds, but we must be in the Word. We must think about the sermon, if you will, for the rest of the week. And by the way, if you're not in a small group, those questions on the back of the bulletin would be good for you to think through anyway. Those are taking it deeper from the little bit of time we have here on Sundays. Diet, we must meditate and pray. We can appreciate Christian music. Just as our physical heart needs vegetables and fruits, our spiritual heart needs nourishment from the Lord. So diet will help strengthen our hearts. Exercise. Our spiritual hearts also need exercise. You need to be faithful about worship. You need to work out with the Word. You need Christian fellowship. You need to be aligned with God, not with the world. As you know, I think I love the hymn, when we walk with the Lord in the light of His Word, we learn to trust and obey. So we're out there walking with the Lord in the light of His Word, and we're learning to trust and obey. We're getting exercise. And then rest. This is one we don't think of so much, I think, for our spiritual beings. The world of the 21st century wants to work us up into a frenzy, but our hearts, even our spiritual hearts, need rest. Consider these texts. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Fret not thyself because of him who prospers in his way. Psalm 37 and verse 7. Rest in the Lord. Here's another one from Matthew. Come to me, all you who are wearied and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you will find rest for your souls. Matthew 11, verses 28 and 29. Or this classic text from the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. What a beautiful picture of resting in the Lord. So diet, exercise, rest, the same things that are important for our physical heart, I think are also important for our spiritual heart. So the way to live more simply then, in these complex times, we're trying to tackle the challenge of complexity in the world, and we're trying to find some spiritual simplicity in the midst of all this complexity. The way to live more simply in these complex times is to focus on the heart. When you're feeling stressed, don't think about what you're seeing and hearing out there in the world. Think about your heart. Turn down your hearing aid. Take off your glasses so that you don't focus so much on everything the world wants you to see and hear, and focus instead on your heart. And while you're at it, understand, as Soren Kierkegaard and the book of James tells us, that your heart wants to focus on one thing. Not 100 things, not 1,000 things, but of one thing, of the Lord. Focus on one thing with your hearts. Focus on the Lord. I like this verse from Proverbs, and we'll close with this. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. Proverbs 4 and verse 23. So let's make that the meditation of our hearts this week. We're going to focus on the heart, and we're going to focus on one thing in the heart, not the noise and clutter and distractions of the world of the 21st century. We're going to focus on our heart, and we're going to have our hearts focused on one thing, focused upon the Lord.